Good evening, everybody. Lovely to see so many people here. We're very delighted to have with us this evening Chris Williamson, who will be speaking in a little while. First of all, we're going to start with Steve Freeman. For tonight is an analysis of the general election and what is the way forward. I'm going to go to Steve Freeman now.
Thank you, Carol, and I'm pleased to see Chris here. I'll just do the background before. It's worthwhile saying that obviously we're not a party and we have no candidates, but we did enter the election in let's call it in the Republican spirit. That is to say, we called it the Palestinian election, and we supported pro-Palestinian candidates. We produced an election leaflet at the beginning. We launched our manifesto. We had a series of weekly forums where we covered the strategy, the crimes of the crown. We talked about an English parliament and public ownership of land. We launched our manifesto. We talked about the video on the crisis in healthcare, health and social care, including we had a talk from Dr. Bob Gill, who's I didn't know is a Workers' Party member. And we also had a session on who to vote for and what to do after the election. So I wanted to set out before we start, and we also, by the way, didn't just do that. I went out, and I know Carol and other comrades went out and supported. I went to Emma's campaign, I went to Andrew Feinstein's campaign, and I went to Jeremy's campaign on a couple of occasions. So we tried to support people that we knew about in our own area. But anyway, I wanted to start the first point by saying that the present epoch, and I think it's really important to talk about what epoch we are living through, what epoch are we in. For me, it begins in 2007, 2008. This is what we said with the banking crisis. And you have to remember that began under a Labour government at the tail end of Blair and Brown. It didn't begin in 2010 with the Tories. I mean, it's not simply a Tory-made crisis. For me, it goes deeper than that. And the Labour Party just talks about the last 14 years as if nothing happened before that. And I think that's wrong. The roots of it for us, and the way we've analysed it, are in what you might call the glorious bankers' revolution of 1688 to 1707. We can go back that far, which established our glorious constitution based on the sovereignty of the crown in Parliament. The latest iteration of that was a 1945 welfare state, which we call the social monarchy, the Elizabethan welfare state, the Second Commonwealth, lots of different names for it. And we know that Thatcher called this socialism and set about dismantling a project which was continued by Blair and Brown. And we have made the case, we've been arguing, that the current period is a kind of end time, or we're in the end game of the Constitution of 1688 and the 1945 social monarchy. And we've said that the 1945 system is in a state of degeneration. So we're arguing that we're in an epoch when the old social constitution is dying before our very eyes or under our feet. And this degeneration has created a crisis in our democracy. That is a crisis in the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy based on the sovereignty of the crown in Parliament. And the crisis of democracy means, for me, that people have lost trust and confidence in the political system and the two main establishment parties that represent it. The crisis we've described the crisis as one in which the old is decaying, putrefying, and dying, and yet the new democracy is not ready to be born. And what is dying is not simply the constitution, but its main political parties, Tory and Labour. And in one sense, we're in a state of political paralysis or stasis. And that is a dangerous period, by the way, because if I'd say it's a most dangerous period, because the longer we live in this period, the more people become disillusioned with so-called democracy, the more appealing is the need for a strong man who can impose order on the anarchy and chaos. So objectively, for us, the crisis of democracy contains a contradiction between opposites. One side, fascism and authoritarian rule, and on the other side stands democracy and a republic. And it boils down, therefore, to looking at the objective conditions. And those objective conditions, we say, demand a new democracy, a republic. But in terms of political consciousness or subjective attitudes or mass politics in England, is not ready to take this step. You can find that by looking at any of the manifestos of any of the organisations. And the working class movement in England is not ready to take us in a democratic direction either. In other words, there's a Republican vacuum on the left in England. And we can predict that, of course, nature abhors a vacuum. And so we would expect to see at least some evidence of spontaneous grassroots republicanism. And I think we can see, and I'll say later, we can see all that. Now, into this situation, last October, 7th of October, Hamas launched its attack on Israel. And the as it were, the blowback from that and Israel's genocidal attack on Gaza and the West Bank has changed the situation. And because it's created a mass democratic, and I'll call it Republican movement on the streets of England and across the world, I mean, in the rest of the UK and across the world. And I call it Republican simply in the sense of it means grassroots civic activism, citizens taking action for democracy and human rights. So we arrive at the election calling for a vote for pro-Palestinian candidates, and at the same time raising the question of the crisis of democracy and the death of our constitution. Now that's where we arrive before the voting takes place. And so when I come back, I'll have another bite at the cherry, but to actually look at what evidence is there in the voting of this situation. I've got one PowerPoint before. I'd like to hear what Chris has to say, but I'll just let me stick up this PowerPoint of where this has arrived at. Let me just do that. Share screen if I could, Carol. The way I might look at this is England's two-party system, because immediately Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are different. So here we have the establishment parties. Well, we say the Protestant, I don't know, Loyalist, Unionist, Tory versus Labour. And I would argue, is there any evidence of a right-wing populism and a left-wing populism? And I would argue that right-wing populism is gravitating towards English nationalism, and I believe that left-wing populism begs the need for an English republicanism. Now, that's just, the question marks are there. I want to argue, as I will argue when I come back again, what the actual evidence in numbers and statistics that would give support to the thesis that I've just put out there before you. I even think that when Chris was talking beforehand, we might see that as evidence of what the grassroots feeling is in the country. So I won't say any more now about the numbers, but I've got quite a few things to say about those numbers. I'll come back after we've heard Chris. That means I don't speak too long, and we'll give Chris a good chance to share his experiences of that. But I will try to illustrate this thesis that I've put forward there in the voting and in the statistics that we had in this election. So at that point, Carol, I will try to stop my sharing.
Thanks very much, Steve. We're now going to go to Chris Williamson to give us his analysis of the general election. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Carol, and thanks for inviting me on to the show this evening. Yeah, let me just sort of start really with some of a bit of a prequel, really, to pick up on some of the points that, or one of the points anyway, that Steve was making. And I think in terms of where we are, I mean, it goes back a bit further than the financial crash in 2008, and I think the first monetarist government really was the Labour government of Jim Callaghan in 1976, when Dennis Healey went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise to draw down which he never did actually in the end, a loan of I think it was almost $4 billion, and the quid pro quo, of course, from the IMF meant that the government had to introduce a range of austerity measures, which led directly to the winter of discontent, and that obviously paved the way for Thatcher, and Thatcher then turbocharged the neoliberal agenda that had been started really by Dennis Healey and Jim Callaghan, and then Blair carried on, and Brown for that matter thereafter. And we're seeing the continuation of that with Starmer and Rachel Reeves. So I think the genesis of the difficulties that the Labour Party is in today, goes back, pre-Blair, pre-Kinnock even, and back all the way to, as I say, Dennis Healey and Jim Callaghan, because in that manifesto for that government in 1974 promised an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power in favour of working people and their families, and they were on course to try to deliver that for the first couple of years of that government. But in 1976, that all got thrown in the bin. And older viewers tonight might remember Dennis Healey on his way to the IMF making a detour to the Labour Party conference and being booed by the delegates there because, the members were not at all in favour of the action that he was proposing to take, nor were people obviously like Tony Benn and many others. But the opportunity for members to voice their opinions these days, not that they were particularly listened to even back then, but even to voice your opinion these days is completely unacceptable now in the modern Labour Party. So the Labour Party, in my opinion, is totally finished, and our important task for us really, I think, is to try to destroy the Labour Party and replace it with an alternative vehicle, because in my opinion it's a bigger barrier to socialism than the Tories are. But in terms of this election, certainly the issue, a foreign policy issue relating to Palestine, was one that I think was very dominant in a lot of constituency. It was certainly a very important issue in my own constituency, and indeed a number of candidates who put this front and centre of their campaign did come quite close to winning a seat. Unfortunately, most of them didn't get over the line. There were 5 independents that did get through, of course, but in terms of the Workers' Party and some of the other independent candidates, people like Liam Mohammed, who nearly took out West Streeting, unfortunately, they didn't quite get there. We didn't do too badly in Derby South, where I was standing, the adjacent constituency to the one where I was the MP for 7.5 years, Derby North. But it was not as good as what I'd hoped for. And, the question of Palestine, whilst it resonated, I think, with lots of people throughout the constituency, particularly in the wards which had a high Muslim population, there was very, very strong and palpable support there. And indeed, all the mosques were very strongly in support of my campaign. And I was saying before we started to Carol that the imam at the main mosque was very strongly supportive of my campaign, and made that very clear at Friday prayers on at least 4 or 5 different occasions. But in the end, it didn't actually translate into a sufficient number of votes on the day. So maybe there's lessons there to learn in terms of how we conduct that campaign. Of course, we were put at a bit of a disadvantage by the fact that the election came a bit sooner than what we'd anticipated. I mean, as far as the Workers' Party were concerned, we hadn't even got a branch established in Derbyshire. We were just in the process of launching one, and we were doing the kind of some of the preliminary arrangements to kick that off. But unfortunately, the election got called, and so that all got put on hold whilst we entered into the election itself. So from a standing start, and everybody was in the same position, of course, and some came a lot closer than I did. But from a standing start, we got over 5,000 votes and pushed the Tories into 3rd place. But I think some of the other issues that maybe we need to be focusing on outside of the election, I think clearly Palestine is going to be an important issue for a lot of people for quite a long time, actually. Particularly while Israel continues its genocidal assault on Gaza. But even beyond that, I think it's going to continue to be an important issue, because I don't think the Zionist entity is ever going to get from under the opprobrium, which I think now is heaped upon it by billions. Actually, it's not just millions, but billions of people around the world. And what it illustrates to me is a massive disconnect between the wider general public and the political class. So that will continue to be, I think, an important issue, which is quite unusual, I think, for a foreign policy issue to be so dominant in a general election. But I think beyond that, and what I'm hopeful for in terms of the Workers' Party is the focus on the working class, who've been ignored for the last 40, getting on for 50 years, really. I mean, ever since that fateful decision by Denis Seeley to go to the IMF, and the adoption of neoliberal economics, which has been an absolute disaster for the working class in this country, which has led to 14.5 million people being plunged into poverty, millions more in precarious employment. Millions of jobs have been offshored to other lower waged economies. And so, the manufacturing base of the country has been absolutely decimated as a result of this embracement of neoliberalism. And I think that's something that we need to be, talking a lot more about, really, because, political education in this country is very low, and people don't, I think, fully appreciate that they're being absolutely screwed over, and don't recognize that, there is an alternative to the way in which, successive governments have actually, pursued a policy agenda. I mean, they've often, make the point, incessantly indeed, make the point that, we can't really afford a good society. We can't afford to do X, Y, and Z when it comes to improving public services and improving the living standards of ordinary British people. But when it comes to waging war, of course, money is no object for the government. And that's an area I think that we do need to be raising political consciousness about, that these are political decisions, that in a country that issues its own currency, money is literally no object. And the only impediment really is the availability of real resources that are for sale in the currency, in pounds sterling. So all of the decisions in relation to austerity and cutbacks and the unwillingness to, for example, bring the utilities back into public ownership, to renationalise the National Health Service, the emphasis which West Streeting is pushing for now to give the private sector even a greater role in the National Health Service than it already has, essentially, expanding the privatisation agenda, which has been, ongoing now for several decades. These are things that we absolutely, it seems to me, need to be hammering home to people. And I often quote Henry Ford, because he said, if people understood how the banking and the monetary system operated, there'd be a revolution by tomorrow morning. So I think that question on the economy is really important, and we do need to be, I know it's a dry topic, but I think it's important that we push that to help people understand that they're having the wool pulled over their eyes, that, all of the dreadful circumstances which so many people are living under today are as a result of political choices. And one of the things I was pushing in my campaign was that, we should be making different political choices to, improve the living standards of ordinary working class people in the country, to invest in our public services. And we know from when Jeremy was the leader of the party and some of the policy proposals that were being put forward at that time around nationalisation and so on, scrapping tuition fees, etc., regulating the housing sector, and building more council houses. These were overwhelmingly popular. I mean, people I'm sure will have seen Giles Brandreth going around the capital of the home counties in Guildford looking for secret socialists and asking the question about whether people supported these sorts of policies. And the universal response was they all did. So they were popular policies, and we, I think, need to be pushing them ever more strongly, and to talk about really the potential for Britain to embrace the fourth industrial revolution, to ensure that working class people in this country see the benefits of it. I mean, one of the things I used to say when I was doing the Democracy Roadshow, which wasn't just about making Labour MPs accountable, it was about actually democratising the economy, was to say that we should all become 21st century Luddites, because all the Luddites were talking about was that new technology should be our servant, not our master. And going back to John Maynard Keynes made a speech, didn't he, in 1930, where he said his grandchildren's generation, i.e., people of my generation, I'm 67 now, would only be working 15 hours a week because of the march of new technology. Well, we know new technology has come and has transformed society in many ways, but it's not to the benefit of ordinary people. The benefits have been accreted by the corporate class, the super rich, the billionaire class. And that's something I think that we need to be, getting that message out there to people, that, a different approach could have been adopted. And, I remember as a young man growing up in the 60s and 70s, at that point in time, we were still being told to get ready for the leisure generation. I think there was at that point in time, an acceptance that we would obviously be working a lot fewer hours by the end of the 1990s into the early 2000s. And that's why local authorities were being told to build leisure centres and swimming pools and golf courses and tennis courts and all the rest of it to ensure that the masses had things to do with, because they'd have more time on their hands. So I think there's plenty of issues, I think, which I think are would be really popular, have the potential to be really popular. We know that, as I've said, that the policies that Jeremy Corbyn was putting forward were popular when you looked at polling. So this point about a populist left movement, I mean, we were sort of on the cusp of creating that, weren't we, when the Labour Party became the biggest party in Western Europe? It's just unfortunate that Jeremy didn't really seize the moment and capitulated to, the haters, the Zionist lobby and so on, and continually apologise and try to, make accommodations to them and to the right wing of the parliamentary Labour Party. And they were never interested in making any accommodation with Jeremy. The only thing they wanted to do was to destroy him, to smash him, to kick him out, because they're all neoliberals and Zionists, and so that was never ever going to work. I mean, that was a poor strategy, really. I mean, one of the things that I think George Galloway said when he won the Rochdale by-election, that, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, he doesn't turn the other cheek. If you slap me, he said, I'll slap you back. And I think that's an approach that we need to take, because we are, taking on incredibly ruthless forces. And so I think the other thing which didn't help us in the election was the fact that the left is still divided. I mean, ever since 2019, I've been talking about the importance of us collaborating, working together, that the only future we've got, the only chance we've got of actually, making any headway is if we recognise and just accept where we agree, and let's just agree to agree where we do, which is on most things, and just have fraternal disagreements where we don't. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, and this is, I think, a problem of identity politics, where people have relegated class politics and economic inequality and have put identity politics front and centre. Now, the establishment are quite happy about that, because identity politics poses no threat, whereas class politics and a campaign against economic inequality, of course, does threaten the established status quo. And so that's something I think we need to work on in terms of finding ways in actually being able to collaborate on the left. And, Jeremy could play an important role in this. And, George has repeatedly publicly asked Jeremy to, lead a movement. I mean, the latest iteration of that, I think George is saying that Jeremy could be, Britain's answer to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and he has the potential to do that. But I don't think Jeremy's interested in doing that, or certainly the people around him are not interested in him doing that, I don't think, and that's a problem. And I think we need to. Nothing would please me more if Jeremy were to do that. Indeed, I've, behind the scenes, repeatedly asked Jeremy to do something similar. I've made the point about, the left needs to collaborate. We need to work together. How can we work together? But Jeremy's never really shown any interest in or willingness to do that. And as I say, nothing would please me more if he were suddenly to become Britain's answer to Jean-Luc Mélenchon. But I don't think that's likely to happen. So, in the absence of that, I think we need to find ways of moving on without Jeremy. There's plenty, I think, for us, just in conclusion, to be optimistic about, in spite of the fact that the Workers' Party didn't get any of our candidates over the line. As I say, we came close in one or two areas. We did get 5 people over, well, I say we, independents, pro-Palestinian candidates did get over the line. I'm hoping that beyond their support for Palestine, that they've got a clearer-eyed view about, how the economy works. And so I think, they could be a hugely important force on some of these other really important domestic issues, as well as the foreign policy ones. So, we need to, I think, try and smooch them and work with them and help them to, make the economic case, as well as the foreign policy one. But so that's a cause for optimism, I think. But also the fact that, yes, I know the Labour Party has got this overwhelming majority, but it is on an incredibly low turnout and an incredibly low popular vote, isn't it? I mean, Jeremy, when he was leading the Labour Party, we got over 3 million more votes than Starmer achieved when we nearly won the election in 2017. And in 2019, which was billed as the most disastrous election that Labour had ever participated in since 1935, I guess it was, if you just look at the number of seats that have that it returned, it was the lowest total since 1935. But in terms of the popular vote, it was still 605,000 more than Starmer achieved. So there's no real appetite, I think, for the Starmerist approach. Many people stayed at home. Certainly, many people, I think, will be progressively minded. Were not, moved by the agenda that Starmer is putting forward. So I think that gives us hope. It gives us scope to build a movement and reach out to those people that didn't turn out and vote on this occasion. And I think with the Workers' Party doing reasonably well, with the independents, as I say, getting over the line, the fact that Labour's mandate is very tiny, the dissatisfaction that there is in the country, there's fertile territory, I think, for a new populist left to emerge, and hopefully we will be able to replicate what they've achieved in France, because I think that's the only chance we've got, frankly. And just one final thing, I know that Steve and others will be pleased about this. In the Workers' Party manifesto, there was a strong commitment to a referendum on the monarchy. I think that the monarchy is obviously an institution that's well out of date, and a debate around that, I think, would also be very timely and worthwhile. And just one final thing, I think I will just say, is that now that the Labour Party has got such a huge majority on such a small percentage of the popular vote, that I think there's real scope now for a big campaign to get a lot of momentum behind it, to press for some electoral reform. And I think there's scope there for the left and the right to collaborate in that campaign. And I don't think people should be sniffy about doing that. I think, just on the maxim that I was talking about earlier on the left, but also where the right, where we agree with what they're saying on the right, well, let's agree where we agree, and let's get a campaign together, because if we could bring about electoral reform, that would be hugely beneficial to the progressive left in this country. And yes, of course, the right would also benefit from it. But the present system is totally unfit for purpose, and it makes it almost impossible, I think, for progressive forces to break through. So that gives me some cause for optimism that we can maybe bring about a big head of steam that might force that electoral reform onto the agenda in a way which will be very difficult for the government to ignore. Although, of course, they benefited massively from the present system, so they'll be very reluctant, I think, to concede it. But I think we need to be big enough to collaborate with those on the right who want to bring about this electoral reform, because the potential benefit for us, I think, benefits for us are potentially enormous.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I agree with, I think, just about everything you've said. Very, very good indeed. I'm going to go, we've got lots of hands up already. I'm going to go straight to Malcolm Millay.
Yeah, I want to ask a question which is slightly not what we're talking about, and it's about swearing allegiance, because we've got Chris Williamson here, who was an MP, and now I'm always impressed. Sinn Féin has now got 7 seats, and they never go to Westminster because they refuse to swear allegiance. So I checked it, and apparently all MPs have to swear allegiance to the monarchy. So I find it a bit difficult that MPs who promote getting rid of the monarchy and Republicans, and I particularly remember Dennis Skinner, actually, because he quite often would stand up in Parliament and say, why have we got this terrible royal family, and what use are they, and why don't we get rid of them, etc. So I don't know what swearing allegiance really means to people. I mean, I suppose if you're an upright and moral person, which of course we all are, if you swear allegiance, you swear allegiance, and that's the end of it. So How do people who promote republicanism and then swear allegiance to the crown, where does that leave them exactly? I'd like to have that answered, please. Chris?
Good question, Malcolm. I'm going to take Tim now. Tim?
I just want to pick up one of the last points in Chris's excellent speech, and that is the need for electoral reform. What most people understand by electoral reform is one form or another of proportional representation. I would rather see a reform in the direction of the French Parliament. Now, we've seen in the last day or two the magnificent result of shutting out the right wing from forming a new government there. Now, to compare with this country, the strongest advocate now for proportional representation that I'm aware of is Nigel Farage, the bloody man. He's been banging on about if we had PR, reform would have over 100 MPs in Parliament now. Well, we don't really want to see that outcome, do we? I would much rather see an outcome by which you'd have the Labour Party for the traditionalists, you'd have the various left parties such as the Workers' Party, Tusk, Transform, etc., and various independent, and the Greens, of course, and they could each 20, 30, maybe 50 MPs, and together they would be able to win in each constituency. The French system has the constituency link. Just like us, they've got a similar number of MPs to what we have. So each MP is linked to his or her local town or area. So it wouldn't be too much of a transformation for the traditionalists, and it would achieve, I think, a good result. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Tim. I've got Mike Hope coming in now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just on what Tim just said, I think there's quite a lot in that, insofar as there is quite a significant group, a more significant group, I think, than I have ever known, of people on the outer left, as it were, people who have either left the Labour Party, been booted out from the Labour Party, coming in from the Green direction, and that certainly, has lays the basis for, concerted pressure. And the problem with the Greens, I mean, where I am, I voted Green. The problem with the Greens, of course, is that they prevaricate on really important issues, like they decided they were going to recognise NATO, having previously not. They also, they support all the main demands on Palestine.
Okay.
But they try to always say, well, a plague on both your houses, and try and apportion blame equally, rather than seeing it as some, a form of oppression going back to 1948 and even before that. So there are problems. Chris, thank you for what you said there. I mean, yeah, are we pleased about demands to abolish the monarchy? Well, obviously, but that's not what our republicanism is about. Our republicanism is against the crown being the symbol of the state. And we are pleased with activities on the street because they are confronting not this state and, you know, the American sort of mega state. And to that degree, there's a more kind of visceral atmosphere now, a more vibrant atmosphere. I have to go back to the time of the hunger strikers, you know, Bobby Sands and Irish Republican hunger strikers in the early 80s. And also, I remember going to a picket when I was extremely young, student at Heysham Docks, where the troops were being sent to Belfast just around the time of Bloody Sunday. That is the degree of outrage. I think you said, you know, Palestine is an important foreign policy issue. I think it's a bit more than that. It has become something that's kind of almost it's sort of become the presiding issue of the day, because we've gotten used to seeing kind of abominations happening in parts of the world where the West completely stood by and let them happen and did not, and quite often fermented them, like in Libya, and allowed Syria to be destroyed. And, you know, then Ukraine, but we then witnessed with Palestine something that was over and above and was really quite horrifying. And that is what has brought people onto the streets. I would say there are two other big strands, though, to the demands that people make. They are certainly for Palestine, for ceasefire, for stopping arms, for, you know, just a complete opposition to our state, the American state, the European states' approach and supporting Zionism. In addition, though, there is the underlying issue of climate, which is an important issue. And I was struck by the fact that the nature demo on my birthday on June the 22nd, I was not on it, it attracted 100,000 people. Now that's no small crowd. The issue of shit in the rivers and shit in the sea was one of the major electoral issues. So, I think, and people do feel that things are changing and getting worse from an environmental and climatic point of view, not just in terms of our living standards and our freedoms. So there is that. And I think the third strand is the demand to reinstitute public services under public control, most particularly the NHS, to refound the NHS on its original principles, to have social care brought in on those principles, but also to have, particularly looking at social care, rather than top-down nationalisation, to have the people who use the services actually saying what they want and being incorporated into the design of those services, something I absolutely cannot see Wes Streeting and his mates doing. We notice he has brought in Alan Milburn as his enforcer in the NHS. I mean, what a complete bastard. Really, that's the direction. We are going to have to fight exceedingly hard.
Absolutely, Mike. I've got to Ian, and then I'll come back to Chris to answer those questions. Ian.
Hi, thanks. I think it's been an incredible meeting already. So many points made that I agree with, but would like to take a bit further or been discussing in the chat. So I hope I can get as much in as I can. I think I was saying to Chris before the formal start of the meeting that I'd campaigned for him, and I thought like him that he was going to win from the one session, albeit a marathon one, I did on the last Saturday with him. Almost everybody every door that we checked that was in said they were going to support him. So yeah, there was a real groundswell there. There might have been more of it was against Margaret Beckett herself, who knows? But yeah, I think it's interesting that of the five places where pro-Gaza independents were elected, we've obviously got the exception of Jeremy Corbyn, who I think is now father of the House, longest serving MP in the new Parliament, and obviously was the leader of the Labour Party. So a very huge national political figure, and a bit of optimism on that front from what I was hearing on the campaign. I don't think there were many people, including Jeremy himself, who were vibing with what John McDonnell came out the morning after, that now Starmer should let him back into the Labour Party. Never mind that I think that's the last thing Starmer would ever do. So I think they might be up for launching a new party or a new network of things on the left. And I think they really should, and they should be inclusive of Galloway and the Workers' Party. I think certainly the people around Jeremy might be more more problematic on that than Jeremy himself, following on from what Chris was saying about their general orientation. But I think the idea that the Workers' Party should be excluded even for going on its own, even as it's trying not to go on its own, is wrong. I think that George has proven to be unsectarian when he keeps saying Jeremy should lead this thing because he's more unifying than me. And I think that they sort of went on their own in the end, because Jeremy didn't do that at this stage. I do wonder about the 5 independents who were elected. Some of the most political campaigns that were linking up nationally: Leanne Mohammed, Claudia Webb, Chris himself, and Jodie, both in the Workers' Party. George himself in Rochdale, who, it's interesting, the bookies had him on to win and Jeremy down for most of the campaign to lose. They all lost. I think Shaukat Adam was part of the No Ceasefire, No Vote national networks. I heard a lot about him, so it's great that he got in Leicester. And the other 2 guys who got through that I'd never heard of before, including in Dewsbury and Batley, I think totally smashed Labour and spoke on the demo on the Saturday after. That's hopeful. I think the most contradictory result of the night, though, was in Blackburn, where both Labour and the real pro-Gaza candidate, I'd say, Craig Murray from the Workers' Party, who ran an exceptional political campaign, both lost to a guy who, almost like the case in Holborn and St Pancras, a Muslim who came out of the woodwork, out of nowhere, saying that only he could be the pro-Gaza candidate simply because he was a Muslim. The guy in Holborn got completely exposed. His wife was friends, and he didn't deny it, with Luke Akehurst, for example. This guy, his campaign manager, was one of Jack Straw's old leading campaigners from the last campaign against Craig Murray 20 years ago. So it was pretty disgraceful as well, from what I've heard. I was in the room when the councillors were all cheering like mad when Craig was announced as a prospective candidate come the general election. Then they beat Labour 2-1 and made Blackburn should have been the most favourable place in the country for pro-ceasefire, anti-war candidates. As I said, with this vote splitter, I was surprised that either of them won, and it's a bit bizarre that it was the vote splitter who they all supported. So I think there's a lot of local networks going on, and with the exception of Jeremy, it seems that at this stage it's more people with local networks than the more political campaigns. Some really agonizingly close, like Leanne Mohammed. If we'd known she was 500 short, there could have been more mobilisation for her. I don't know how much people thought Jeremy was in very serious danger of losing, because he won quite well in the end, and how much of it was just don't want to risk it, that if everyone thinks this one's in the bag and goes elsewhere, then maybe he would lose. So there were a lot of freak results with this first past the post, so I'll wind up at this stage by saying I agree with Chris about campaign to get rid of it. It's clearly had a lot of freak results, both at the local level, but also the national level. 20% of people voted for this government, 40% didn't vote at all, 40% voted for other parties. So that's hardly should be a landslide. And I think, yes, working with the right, also with woolly liberal types, have always been for electoral reform. It might be quite a a strange coalition. And actually, Starmer should realise with a sandcastle majority, it might be in his interest in 5 years' time not to have first past the post. But I expect that he won't, because he's a natural Conservative, and it did so well for him this time. All right, thanks. I might come back in, but yeah.
Thanks very much, Ian. Two other hands have gone up now, but I think I'm going to bring Chris back to answer those questions first of all.
Yeah, well, let me start with Ian's comments first of all. I mean, I agree with Ian's analysis. I think is absolutely spot on in what he said. I think it'd be a real mistake if Jeremy were, not that it's never likely anyway to happen for Jeremy to accept the Labour whip. Although, as I understand it, he was still hankering after that right up to almost the election being called. And I think Jeremy missed a trick, really. He ought to, in my opinion, have, when Starmer made it clear that he was not going to be a Labour candidate, frankly, from the time he was suspended, actually, but certainly from the time he said that he would not be a candidate, I think Jeremy missed a trick in actually not coming out and helping to form a national alternative movement, because it's really crucial that we build an alternative vehicle to the Labour Party. The Labour Party, as George, I beg your pardon, always says, it's another cheek of the same backside, two cheeks of the same backside, Conservatives and Labour, or really all the political parties in apart from Sinn Féin, really. But essentially, they're all signed up to the whole neoliberal agenda. They're all signed up to the same foreign policy approach as well. And we therefore need a real alternative to that. Mike's point, going in reverse order, made some good points, I think, about the Green Party support for NATO, and it's also essentially a Zionist body as well. I remember them rejecting Ken Livingstone's application for membership on the grounds that he was some sort of anti-Semite. So they bought into that whole bogus anti-Semitism agenda. But the other point that Mike made about it's much more than simply getting rid of the monarchy. I do agree with that, although I think getting rid of the monarchy and a referendum on that would be a good first step. But I think embracing the sort of Commonwealth of Britain bill that Tony Benn put forward many moons ago, I think it was co-sponsored actually by Jeremy Corbyn at the time, is a sort of approach I think we should be pushing forward with. And there's a lot of good stuff in that, of course, isn't there? And a lot of stuff I think we should, it's kind of plain common sense, isn't it? That I think a lot of people could understand and get behind. And we maybe need to be doing more really to just highlight the way in which those powers of the crown are exercised, and how it's it's actually inconsistent with a sort of open democratic society. And so I think the more we could do around political education on that, I think would be very important. And the point about the election and the growing concern that there is for environmentalism, and there is a growing concern for it, but it doesn't seem to be translating into votes at the ballot box. I mean, and the last election was evidence of that. So again, I think there's more for us to do in that regard. And for people to, and anybody with any common sense, of course, would be concerned about pumping raw sewage into the rivers and to the sea. But it's important, I think, obviously, to make that connection between the privatisation agenda and the fact that this is happening, that billions and billions of pounds are taken out of the industry, the water industry, that is, for dividends for shareholders that obviously wouldn't be necessary were it in public ownership, and those resources could be devoted to improving the infrastructure and actually reducing people's bills at the same time. So there's a job for us to do there. Tim's point about electoral reform, I think, is well made as well. I mean, I think the French system does have some attractions to it, but I'm not sure that would go far enough. Actually, it would be better than the present system that we've got, no doubt about that. But I think the danger is, because as I understand the way the French system operates, is everybody kind of gets involved in the first round, and then it's the top two that go through. And the problem is that a lot of the also-rans, all the sort of progressive socialist groups, and also some of the right-wing groups, of course, would get excluded from the final runoff. And so I think some sort of proportional system is necessary, as well as maybe trying to maintain that constituency link. I mean, the Scottish system is a hybrid system, isn't it? For the Scottish Parliament, they have a proportional system and they have a list system, and they have a constituency vote as well. So I don't know, maybe some variation on that would be appropriate, but the present system is totally unfit for purpose. And whilst it's true that we wouldn't necessarily want to see 100 right-wing MPs in the House of Commons, in some ways I think that's a price we'd have to pay. And I think we could beat them with the force of our argument anyway, actually. So I don't think we should be frightened about that. And just on that point as well, actually, although, Nigel Farage is making a great play about the fact that, which is understandable in some ways. I mean, it isn't democratic at all. They've ended up with 3 MPs, and the Liberal Democrats who got 500,000 less have ended up with 71, I think they've got. But the fact is that, they got about 4 million votes, which is only about the same as the UKIP at its high water mark. So they haven't made much progress. Okay, yes, it's 4 million on a lower turnout, but if you just take it the raw numbers, they haven't made any progress, in fact, on where they were a while ago. And so, we shouldn't, I don't think, be too panicked about the rise of the right. I don't think we should be complacent either, but I don't think we should get too aerated about it either. And as I say, I think with the force of our argument, given a fair wind, I think we can defeat them anyway with the arguments that we have, which I think are much more compelling than theirs are. And the final point that Malcolm made about the oath of allegiance, yes, I mean it is a contradiction, and I found it very, very difficult. And to sort of square it, made it clear at the beginning of making that oath, I said that I only take this oath in order to serve my constituents. But like my father before me, I object to an unelected head of state, and would want to see a democratic system put in its place, and then go on to make the oath. I mean, we could take the principled stand of the Sinn Féiners. Of course, that would mean then you wouldn't have that opportunity, that platform to raise issues on the floor of the chamber and so on, in the way in which you can once you've taken that oath. So, yeah, it's a tricky one, really. That, I guess, on balance, with that caveat, making that clear that it's done under sufferance when the oath of allegiance is made. I think that for me anyway, that's how I squared it. Whether that's what we should do or not, I don't know. But I just think the opportunities of having that platform on the floor and being able to press ministers in that way would be denied if you were not to take your seat. But I guess if lots more people were to not take the seat, well, maybe that would cause some constitutional crisis, and maybe it would force a change. But until such time as there's a critical mass of people willing to do that, I guess, like the Sinn Féin MPs, they just simply would ignore that and just carry on, and in some ways be grateful of the fact that they're not going to get scrutinised by people who have an entirely different worldview to the prevailing status quo in the House of Commons at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Very good answers. I'm going to go back to Steve, first of all, because he wants to come in and give his part too, and then we'll go to Phil and Robin. So, Steve.
I want to address a couple of things that Chris said, because there were a couple of ways in which he didn't really understand the thesis. I agree that Jim Callaghan started the process of the move towards neoliberalism before Thatcher. She carried on. I agree with that point. But the point I was making, Chris, is that 2008 is not just a quantitative change in the downgrading of our welfare state. It's a qualitative change. We have moved into a different epoch. If you keep adding more quantity, you reach a point where everything breaks. And the left hasn't grasped we're working with a broken democracy. And if we've got a broken democracy, we cannot utilize that broken democracy to bring out, it's not like we've got a proper system and we can kind of win an election and then proceed accordingly. Our broken democracy, and it's not just about the voting system either, it's about Parliament itself. It's about the way our political system, our constitution, that's why Tony Benn was right by what he did 30 years ago, that nobody's ever taken it up. If we had a Republican Party, and we don't, Chris, is what I would say, despite what you're saying there, a Republican Party would tell the electorate before, as they were getting voted, if you vote me in, as a Republican, I will not take the oath of allegiance. I will go to the door of Parliament and then refuse. Charles Bradlaugh did this back in the 1870s. He refused. He refused to swear on the Bible to God. He refused to do that. They sent him out. They wouldn't let him sit in Parliament. He went back to his Northampton constituency and stood again. They then re-elected him with more votes than the previous time. He went there again. This happened 3 times. Each time his vote got bigger because he was clear in advance what he was doing. You can't get elected without mentioning it, then go to the door of the House of Commons and then say, oh, by the way, I've just got this principle I never mentioned to anybody in the election, and now I'm going to use it against her. So I think, why would we? Tony Benn was absolutely right. This is not a joke, an oath. It's almost, Tony Benn describes it in his book as being a fundamental part of our unwritten constitution, is the oaths of loyalty that all parts of the state have to swear. And he says, don't take it as a joke. It's serious. It's like a legally binding contract that you undertake. So that's quite an important thing. I mean, I want to emphasize that this qualitative change after 2008 comes to a head certainly in the Brexit vote. When England votes to leave the European Union, it's a bit like unplugging the country from the European life support machine. It's bound to, where people think that's going to solve the problem, it's actually making our economy worse, because that's what we've done, and that has been the biggest single change in what we're doing. But let's just go back to the election. I did want to mention, all right, a couple of things, 2 things in fact. I want to mention what Starmer said when he stood on the at the door of Downing Street when he made his speech. He said that he addressed the country speaking about the weariness at the heart of the nation and the lack of trust in Westminster politics. He was pointing to what we were pointing to. This wound could only be healed, he said, by actions, not words. He said, it is surely clear that to everyone that our country needs a bigger reset, a discovery of who we are. And that's the thing, because no matter how fierce the storms of history, one of the great strengths of this nation has always been our ability to navigate away to calmer waters. Well, I don't think that strength is there, by the way, but he's using his own language to say that he thinks the crisis is very severe. And Wes Streeting said something quite interesting when he came up. Perhaps he was woken up by the fact he nearly lost his seat. It was probably a bit of a shock to him. He said, from today, the policy of the department is that the NHS is broken. That is, the experience of patients who are not receiving the care they deserve, and the staff working in the NHS who can see that, despite giving their best, this is not good enough. Now, of course, we're no illusions in what Wes Streeting is going to do. But these are pointing to a much deeper and more fundamental crisis in our political and social system than I think Chris is giving recognition to. And if you look at the votes, what happened in the election? Okay, and I'm just going to share the screen again, Carol. Where's my screen share? If I can see a screen, I can see it. There we go. If you can just do this again, because I've put the numbers up there. And the numbers are in here. If I could do that, share a second. Not that one, not that one. Keep going. Not that one, not that one. That's the one I wanted to show you. Okay, that's the votes that we had. Let's see, Labour had 8.3 million votes. The Tories had 6.2 million. The Liberal Democrats 3.1, Reform 3.7. The Independents got 500,000 votes. You know, that's amazing, really, when you think about it. The Greens got 1.7. And the Workers' Party, although they got no seats, got 0.21 million votes. That's a lot of votes. I mean, you know, in any other way. So I've added them on because I'm really only dealing here with those people who actually got seats. The Tories suffered their worst defeat in their history. Labour and the Tories, or the two-party combined vote, was 56.4%. That's the lowest by some distance since Labour was formed in 1923. So the two-party system is actually breaking up. The vote for Labour has fallen, as I already mentioned, 12.8 million in 2017, 10.2 million. and Starmer got 8.3 million, as you can see up there. And that the first past the post system gives Labour 34% and an absolutely landslide in seats. So Farage, whatever we say about Farage, he's making a point that's true. It's a distortion in both ways. Not only does the Reform Party not get the number of seats to match the number of votes they got, but Labour has got a massive landslide compared to the number of votes that they got. The voting system, more people are voting tactically. 1 in 4 were voting not for who they wanted to support, but voting against somebody else. You know, it's not really what you want. Turnout has fallen. Turnout has gone down consistently over the last. The turnout is falling is a sign that our democracy isn't working. It's now gone down to 60%. 40% of the electorate did not vote or did not think it was worth bothering. This is the turnout is the second lowest turnout ever in UK election history since 1885, barring 1 year, which was 2001, when it was 59%. These are very significant things. There is a trend happening there in those numbers towards a multi-party system slowly happening. Performance of the small parties shows the small parties won 30% of the share of the vote, which is the highest since 1918. And of course, we have the pro-Palestinian party with 5, the independents, as it were, the 5. That is quite an amazing thing. So what I'm saying is, because this is not a normal election. The whole system is unraveling under our eyes, and we need to have a much more radical approach to democracy. And I have to say, when I look at the problem for me with George Galloway is not George Galloway, Chris. A lot of people think the problem with the Workers' Party is George Galloway. It's the programme that the Workers' Party's got. And it's not really addressing the question of democracy in a deep enough way. And I can give you a concrete example. Craig Murray and another MP, I think, Yvonne Ridley, I think it was, they didn't join, as I understand, they didn't join the Workers' Party. Why not? Because they support Scottish independence. And George and the Workers' Party is a British party. So we've got a problem about the national question that needs to be discussed as well. So I'm going to end, I think, on that point, really, to say that there is evidence to show that this is not a normal election and we're not in a normal situation. And it's not just a continuation of neoliberalism, it's a qualitative break that we're in now. And therefore, we need to think very radically about what kind of programme that we need to have for the future. And democracy, the idea of a referendum on the monarchy, that's something that everybody says. And I just think, well, look what happened in Australia. If we had a referendum on the monarchy, they'd construct it in such a way as people end up voting against it. That's not the way to do it. There's a different way. I don't think, final point is, I don't think we should construct an election system on designing it to keep particular people out of Parliament. I think that would be wrong. The present system has been designed, by the way, for that purpose by the ruling class, to keep particular ideas out of Parliament. And as Democrats, we should not adopt, let's go for this system because it'll do that or it'll do that. I think we have a democratic system. That's how it has to work. And my final point would be this. We do not have a serious, nobody on the left, neither Jeremy Corbyn nor the Workers' Party, is really taking seriously the crisis of democracy and the need for a democratic programme. It's not the monarchy, it's Parliament that's broken. I hear, and that's my last point, I hear today MPs were going into a Gothic chamber which had 100 staircases, Chris, you've probably been up and walking up and down all of them, and 1,000 rooms. There's a building that's not been designed for anything sensible at all. And it's the Parliament that's broken. It's the House of Commons that's absolutely useless. You know, that's the thing that we need to focus on, the failure of Parliament to do anything at all. And Tony Benn did address that in his bill, by the way. So I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Steve. If you can stop screen share.
Stop share, sorry.
Be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. I'm coming back to, we've got 2 more hands up. Phil and Robin, and then I'll go back to Chris again. Phil.
Well, I think I have a few quick points. I think there should have been more coordination between Corbyn and Leanne, because getting rid of Streeting was a key chance, because we knew on the ground that the figures were good for Leanne. And James Schaefer, who spoke on several outlets before, including Novara Media, before the election, did say that they had the biggest ground campaign of any constituency in the country. On some days, they had up to 1,000 people out on the street working for them. Some people were knocked up 5 times. It was not overkill at all. I appreciated the fact we wanted to beat this particularly undemocratic move by the Labour Party to suppress the local democracy. But Leanne needed more help, and she should have got it. And that points to a lack of coordination. We're in the early days of this independence MPs, but we need to learn quickly from our mistakes, because that was a huge chance. If we'd knocked Streeting out of the park, it would have posed a real severe crisis for the approach they're going to take to the National Health Service, because Streeting has been working on this for a long time in hand in glove. As we know, he has £175,000 worth of healthcare company money funding his office. So getting rid of him was crucial, and she nearly made it. And that and Faiza Shaheen were the 2 most depressing elements of the night, as far as I was concerned. But Corbyn did do it, and that was important. I think democracy is the key to this. And I return to the point Steve made, that there is no left Republican offer, which for me, as long as we hide our light under a bushel and pretend we don't want to be a republic, and we don't clarify the difference between our target is the Crown and the entire state apparatus of the House of Commons, the buildings, the House of Lords, the Privy Council. The monarchy is, of course, as Shelley said, the string that ties the robber's bundle, but it's still there and it needs to go. However, we aren't on our way there yet, because there's no common thinking amongst those who got elected apart from Gaza. Therefore, it's very important that we come together. We think of this as a pro-Palestinian party and movement at the moment, but it needs to broaden, because the important thing is to take the lessons of Palestine and bring them back to this country. What is Palestine about? It's about poverty. It's about lack of rights. It's about lack of democracy, obviously. It's about, in a sense, we have been colonized by a very powerful ruling class that is able to expropriate money from our country and send it where it wants. And Chris mentioned the water companies. Well, yeah, let's get started. I mean, every one of these Thatcherite privatizations have served to siphon money out of the country. That's why we have this huge disparity between, one of the biggest in history, between the very rich and the very poor. And I think we need to think about a name for the alliance. That's going to have to be done sometime, because we can't go along with, so-and-so from Didsbury and so-and-so from, like, Chris Derby South or whatever. We need to think about a name. I wanted also to talk to you a tiny bit about something I heard on Times Radio yesterday. I do deviate from the model that we have here. I do listen to strange stations like Times Radio, and I found none other than Tim Shipman there. Now, Tim Shipman is no relation to that GP. He's, in fact, published several books on the inside track on the Crown and its operations. It's a very Crowny type descriptive thing. It's not very analytical. It's not an Ian Dunt, for example, who did a book on Westminster. So if I might just point out a couple of things there. Tim Shipman said that he saw, quotes, the pro-Palestinian Gaza faction was very organized. A lot of people in the Labour Party and around MI5 thought this was an organized Islamist effort to cause trouble. Several MPs had colossal amounts of security because of threats, and very unsavory and unappetizing picture it was. Now, I think this is fascinating, because it shows that, the minute there is a democratic, from the bottom up type move in this country, there's an attempt to turn it into some sort of illegal Cato Street conspiracy type event. Think back to Shelley's period. Sorry, Chris, I'm a Shelley, and therefore I tend to do this. But Cato Street was exactly that. It was a kind of attempt to show to put the opposition to the reactionary government at the time into a bad light. And that's what they've done. They've tried to brand it as that. I mean, they were absolutely stunned. You could see it from Shipman. I didn't start writing notes when he said it, but you could see it from Shipman's face. They were all absolutely stunned by Streeting's result. And Streeting made a side view comment about nasty people trying to brand the opposition to him as some kind of Islamist plot without using the term Islamist, but it was clear what he was saying. And I think that raises the question of where we go with Nigel Farage. Now, in 1978-9, when we had a previous upswing in the National Front, we also had a mass movement of the Anti-Nazi League, which provided the necessary organization to thwart the National Front. I was part of that huge demonstration in Lewisham that stopped them in their tracks and turned them round, bricks and all. So we have to bear in mind that Farage's project is not the same as the National Front project. Farage made it clear in his speech in Clacton that he wants to organize a party with branches in every town, with membership he's aiming for is 250,000. Now, it's not difficult for you to, if you use your common sense, to see how that could become the basis of a mobilized right-wing fascist type force, something Tommy Ten Names Robinson has been trying to do for a long, long time. Are we ready for this? Is the left able to do anything? I would argue it's not. So we have to start thinking very much more rounded, first about democracy, then about a Republican take on it, and lastly, about mobilizing against what will come back as a very powerful right in the next 5 years. It's his 5-year project. The Parliament seats are purely and simply to provide him the platform to do that. Thank you. Apologies again, Carol.
Oh, thank you very much, Phil. That was a really important, if very worrying point, a very important one. I'm actually going to go to Jennifer because we haven't had a woman speak so far. So I'm going to go to Jennifer first. Jennifer.
Good evening. It seemed a bit strange living here in Dewsbury that nobody's mentioned the Batley and Dewsbury model, which crept in quietly. Labour obviously knew very little about it, and it was a very, very successful. And it was a coming together of communities at grassroots level. They got themselves well organised, had initially managed to get 5 councillors for their independent faction, and then went on to successfully mount a challenge for an MP, which again was successful. And I think it is going to be a good model. I think the choice is a good one. There was, as far as I could see, there was no nastiness at all. People who had wanted to stand for the independents and weren't chosen had agreed beforehand that they would not, that they would back off and they would support the chosen candidate. There were 1 or 2 others that wanted to stand, but were persuaded, I don't know how, but they didn't stand, and it all seemed incredibly amicable. And they had a good campaign, a good leaflet, and success with no rancor or anything. So I just hope that this very inexperienced new MP will find himself a good mentor in the House of Commons, possibly Jeremy Corbyn, perhaps, and will learn the ropes very quickly and become very effective for a very effective MP for us here in Batley and Dewsbury. Everybody says Dewsbury and Batley, but actually it's Batley and Dewsbury. So it's a good model. I hope it holds together. It was fortunate that the communities are already well organised, because they are Asian communities organised around local mosques. And that was the core of the campaign. But I'm not aware that there was resistance or unpleasantness from the white community. We were supportive, because we live very much together. It is quite an integrated community in this area. That's all I'll say. I have high hopes for the future.
That is really, really encouraging, Jennifer. Lovely to hear about community action like that. That's exactly what we would advocate. I'm going to bring in Robin now.
I'm very pleased to hear that there is a move to create an alternative to the Labour Party. I was the constituency Labour Party policy and education officer in Lowestoft until I resigned in January, following the local parliamentary candidate and region working together to ban education sessions that I was organising and to ban motions that I and others were presenting to the AGM. And I decided that I couldn't continue to work within such an authoritarian grouping. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about. If I did it correctly, I sent an email today or yesterday to the Google group about participatory democracy and how my belief that participatory democracy is not compatible with military action of any kind. And so I have a bit of a concern that professional military training will be offered to everybody in the Commonwealth that is being proposed. And I say this because my experience of participatory democracy, and I have some, is that it requires a level of presence to each other that can permit what for me is the only way forward, which is consensual decision making. And when people become as intimate as they do, when they really meet each other and when they really listen to each other, when they hear each other, when they get down to what really people do fundamentally need, then it becomes perfectly obvious that killing anybody under any circumstances is just completely anathema to people who wish to exercise that kind of participatory democracy. So in my view, a program of any organization that I would like to support would declare this country to be non-belligerent, would remove itself from all military pacts, whether offensive or defensive, would end arms production and live in peaceful coexistence with every other country as long as nations themselves are required. So that's point one. The second point is that I am absolutely convinced that the only way the kind of program that this organization and many others on the left are seeking can only be realized when the economy is taken into the hands of working people. And that means a level of public ownership. I'm currently reading Tony Benn's diaries for around 1973. And not only do they talk about taking the commanding heights of the economy into public ownership, they're also talking about limiting the role of the stock exchange. That needs to happen because it's just a casino. The banks need to be stopped from being able to produce money out of a hat and charging interest on it. And we need to be perfectly open with everybody that this is the kind of program that we're pursuing, because it is the only way in which we and the government that hopefully will represent all of us, if it's not us ourselves, can succeed in transferring the wealth from the rich to working people. Okay, that's me.
Thanks very much, Robin. I'm going to ask John to be very, very brief. John Tumman?
Basically, I think we're in a situation where there is a question posed by the election and a lot of the statistics which have been done and dusted now, which is that we will never have such a set of beautiful facts at our disposal to again, and we certainly haven't had it in the past, to argue, to build a mass movement to do away with first past the post. And what form of PR we have can be decided after that in a democratic fashion. That is the road I would like to see the left going down, not the road where we try to do a quick fix to form a new organisation quickly out of the grassroots movement of Palestine solidarity, because that is a single issue. And you don't build a general movement out of a single issue when you've got unresolved contradictions between the main community behind that, many of which are for reasons of religion and ethnicity. You cannot work through those kind of contradictions quickly. And the idea of building a new party now around Corbyn or Galloway or any of these figures is a quick fix solution. We've been down this road so many times, Scargill, Ted Grant, how many do you want me to mention? Ken Loach. But we do have a fantastic opportunity to sell the idea of the undemocratic nature of first past the post to the British people. And I think the British people, who have shown in this election through a disastrously low turnout, that what Steve said, people are falling out of trust, out of confidence in this electoral system and this political system. So if we go down the road of trying to build a mass movement to topple first past the post and discuss the alternatives on the road to achieving that with the wider public, the working class, but trying to hastily form a new party, this is not the moment. We have got excuse my French, shitty record on doing precisely that. We are not good at it. We are in no state to do it. We are fractured. We are in disarray. We have little successes here and there through local issues, local campaigns, and a single issue which overrides everything else. But the idea of forming a new organisation as of now usually comes up after a general election. It never works. But the idea of challenging first past the post is on the agenda, and we have the factual argument that we will never have again, because the degree of disproportionality, the degree of the democratic deficit in all of this is there for anybody with eyes to see. And that's the road the left should go down.
Absolutely, John. I couldn't agree more. I'm going to go back to Chris now to come back on those questions and contributions.
Thanks, Carol. Well, let me go again in reverse order. I think I agree with John, and I think I made that point in my opening remarks about electoral reform, and we should focus on that. I'm not so sure about John's point, though, about the Palestine simply being a single issue, because whilst that's true at one level, I think what it's done is to remove the scales from people's eyes on many other issues as well. So I think it does have the potential to, build into a wider movement, because I think people are beginning to question, the narrative from the political class and from the mainstream media, because they can see that they're being lied to over the question of Palestine. And I think that is leading people to look with greater skepticism, perhaps, at the political class and the mainstream media. And I think, therefore, there is an opportunity for us to utilize that to, build a wider movement. But obviously, it shouldn't just be simply about using that and piggybacking on that. I think it needs to be wider, but I do think that has the potential to be a big part of that. I think Robin's point, I think we're all talking about, yes, we need an alternative and so on, and we've got to focus on first past the post. On addressing first past the post and some form of electoral reform. But the problem is who's going to do it? I mean, we're sort of good at sort of talking about this is what needs to be done, but somebody needs to do it. And in terms of an alternative, the Workers' Party is there. I mean, it's demonstrated that it can be relatively popular and with a fair wind and a bit more publicity, because we were starved of any publicity, as I'm sure everybody was aware. We might have done better than we actually did. We fielded 154 candidates and got a return of 200,000 votes as a result of that. So the Workers' Party there. I mean, let's use the bodies that are already in existence, and the Workers' Party is certainly one, because otherwise, how else are we going to actually galvanise and bring people together and coordinate if we don't actually use some sort of existing infrastructure that's already in existence? I mean, I'm not quite sure how it would actually happen, and we'd end up just talking about it on webinars like this, and nothing would ever really happen. So I guess my plea would be to join the Workers' Party and help us to move this whole democratic agenda forward. I'm also a big supporter of participatory democracy, something that Robin spoke about. And I think if we can start to get footholds in local government, that would be a good starting place to actually implement participatory democracy. And the point that I think that Robin also made about leaving NATO and so on is a key Workers' Party policy. So thinking, many of the issues we're in agreement. We may, perhaps people might feel should go further in some areas, but that can be achieved if people, join and participate in the policy-making process within the party. In the end, politics is the art of the possible, isn't it? And, we've got to, whilst, much of what I, as I say, agree with Robin, we've got to get from A to B. And, sometimes we have to sort of take smaller steps, maybe the one great giant leap in one fell swoop. Jennifer made a good point about unity in Batley. I wish indeed that had been the case in other areas where unfortunately there was division and people standing against the Workers' Party candidate or another independent candidate, and that wasn't helpful. But don't underestimate the role of the state in actually fomenting these disputes, these disagreements within the left, because clearly a united left would be a very powerful bulwark against the status quo. And we started to sort of maybe get there when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party, and we know what happened there. The establishment absolutely panicked and used every dirty trick in the book to bring him down. And unfortunately, Jeremy didn't rise to the challenge in the way in which I think he ought to have done to fight back. As for finding a good mentor in the House of Commons, I think that's going to be very, very difficult. Maybe Jeremy's about the only one, but I don't think there's anybody else there that would be a good mentor for the new emerging independent MPs that have been elected. Phil also talked about coordinating the ground campaign, and I think that ought to have been better organised. There were some areas where there was loads and loads of volunteers, and other areas, like in my own constituency, for example, we didn't have huge numbers of volunteers. And maybe if the independent forces on the left, were able to unite on a common cause, then that would be perhaps a little bit easier to organise, because in the end you ended up in a situation where there was huge numbers in some constituencies and not enough in others, and we could have brought home better results perhaps if we had shared our resources a bit better. But we've got to find a mechanism to make that happen. We can wish for it to happen, but we've got to find a mechanism to be able to make it happen. I think Phil also mentioned that Faiza Shaheen's result was one of the biggest disappointments of the night, and it certainly was a disappointment. But let's not run away with the idea that that Faiza was not without her faults. I mean, she bought absolutely into the whole anti-Semitism scam and was someone who was welcoming my removal from the Labour Party. And like many people on the left who bought into that whole nonsense at the time, ended up themselves being victims of it. I'm reminded of the Pastor Niemöller poem over and over again. First they came, and there's so many people who kept their heads down in the hope that it wouldn't come for them, but ultimately, in the end, it did. I think that's everybody's apart from Steve's last remarks. And he mentioned Brexit and talks about the EU being a kind of life support for Britain. Well, I would disagree with that. I don't think it was a life support mechanism for Britain at all. If it was so good, how is it that we ended up with 14.5 million people living in poverty whilst we were members of the European Union? How is it that our manufacturing industry got absolutely decimated while we were members of the European Union? And indeed, it was, at the end of the day, it is still a neoliberal capitalist club. The presumption is in favour of privatisation. And, I think whilst I did campaign for a Remain and Reform agenda, I think that was a bit naive on my part, because I don't think the EU is capable of reform. And what I was arguing after the referendum gave the result that it did, in the Parliamentary Labour Party meetings, I was arguing that we should say that we will get Brexit done, but we will deliver a people's Brexit, not a banker's Brexit. And I think actually being outside the European Union does give enormous opportunities and flexibilities to a progressive socialist government, if we can ever get one, that wouldn't be restricted by state aid rules and all the vagaries of the European Union, the strictures that it imposes on member states. And I think it would enable us to really build a good society, which would be much more difficult to achieve whilst we were in the European Union. Even bringing the utilities back into public ownership would be maybe not impossible, but would be very difficult whilst we were a member of the European Union. As for Steve's point about not really getting, and the Workers' Party not really getting the kind of wider democratic, the way in which the democracy is kind of broken, and the need for more fundamental reforms. I mean, it's a start. What I would say is, what I would argue is that come and join us and make it better. It's all very well to think radical, but the question is, how do we deliver radical change? That's the crucial thing. And I think it was Steve that made the point about the House of Parliament being absolutely unfit. I totally agree with that. In fact, I was arguing when the discussion was taking place about refurbishing the House of Commons, and I think the varying figures, I don't know what the latest figure was, but when I was a member of Parliament, still it was, I think there was a figure of about 3.5 billion.
Billion, that's right, yeah.
A billion, and but it varied from 3.5 billion to something like 5 or 6 billion, depending on which kind of way, which model they adopted in terms of decanting or doing the refurbishments around members while there. I mean, one of the things they talked about spending, I think it was about 20 or 30 million quid. They wanted to, whilst Parliament was being refurbished, they want to spend 20 or 30 million pounds to build a replica of the House of Commons chamber. I don't know if that's actually gone through now, and whether that's going to happen. What an absolute absurdity, when it's not totally unfit for purpose. There's not even enough seats for MPs to sit on. Nowhere to put your papers, nothing. I mean, the whole thing's a complete farce. I actually did a video. I used to do a regular Week in Westminster video when I was MP last time around, 2017 to 2019. Well, up until I was suspended anyway. One of the most popular videos I did was on that very point, and I was suggesting that we should close Parliament down, turn it into maybe a museum of democracy, and move Parliament to the north of the country, because it's very unhealthy to have the commercial centre and the political centre in the same location. They're in this bubble, aren't they? And that's why you see spending on infrastructure per capita in London, absolutely dwarfing anything that's spent on, infrastructure and so on, and public transport elsewhere in the country, particularly in the north of the country. And the support for that was absolutely overwhelming from people who watched the video, and the responses we got was really encouraging. So, I mean, I think in conclusion, I mean, there is a lot of potential for us to go forward. Lots of good arguments that we can make, lots of things which I think would resonate with the wider general public. But I suppose the key thing is finding the vehicle to actually make some of this stuff happen. We're very good on the left at, talking a good talk and saying what needs to be done. We're not so good, it seems to me, on actually, bringing it about, organising it. And, rather than continually say, well, we need a new vehicle, we've got a new vehicle. It's the Workers' Party. It might not be perfect, but it's there. And maybe something else can emerge beyond that. But we've got that vehicle right now. So why don't we use it? A lot of people are, rallying to it and joining forces with it. It is a democratic body. There is an opportunity to, shape the policy going forward. But without that, what else have we got? What other vehicle is there? It seems to me without a organised vehicle, it's going to be much more difficult to bring about some of the changes that everybody's been talking about on the chat this evening, all of which, you know, very laudable and very worthwhile. But as I say, talk is easy. It's actually putting things into practice, you know, can be a bit more tricky, can't they? And as I say, let's use the vehicle that we have at our disposal right now. It has proved itself reasonably popular. It is something which resonated, it seems, in the election. It's done better, it seems to me, than any other left alternative to the Labour Party. And so there is real potential there. And I would urge people, therefore, to you know, come and join us and help us build it better if you don't think it's quite where it should be at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I'm just going to bring Steve back in for his concluding remarks. Steve?
Yeah, just to address what Chris said there, you know, I would consider joining some organisation on the left, and I wouldn't rule any out. But we have a what we put forward is a manifesto. So what I'd like to do is to send that manifesto to you, Chris, if you haven't, and just get some comments on it, because we would see then how close or how far we are away. I wouldn't just go into any old. I've been in many organisations on the left on all the wrong politics, and then they've all ended up failing. So I'm not keen at my age to go on to another one if the direction isn't correct. But I agree with you. You've got to get your hands dirty to build anything. Now, but what I would want to make a couple of points from what else has been said, and it does tie in with something you said and something Jennifer said. First of all, there's an organisation in this country called Republic. They do protests where they have a flag going, "Not my king," and that is the fundamental thing they're talking about, "Not my king." But this is not the republicanism that we are talking about. It's really quite different. People think that "not my king" is what republicanism is. And I think there's two things that I would put forward for republicanism. One is that Jennifer identified the idea that for us, republicanism has to come from below. It has to come through the grassroots civic activism and civic organization. And when I said there's a Republican vacuum in this country, I think that vacuum is being filled precisely by the kind of thing that Jennifer was telling us about in the Batley and Dewsbury model. And I'm sure that's not the only place that is happening. So I think that there is republicanism at the grassroots is already probably happening already. Now, the second thing is that our republicanism is much more focused on the question of an English Parliament. I mean, what you said about it, Chris, is what I agree with. I promoted the idea that Westminster should be closed down and we should have a new English Parliament fit for purpose somewhere in the middle of the country. And as you say, that would be very popular, but nobody on the left is advocating that, doesn't think it's okay. Everybody on the left, not you, from what you've just told us, having been in there and see what a nonsense it is, to benches 2 swords apart, you know, in case we start stabbing each other with our swords. I mean, the whole thing is the culture of it, everything about it is absolutely rotten to the core. So why are we trying to reform it so we can get in there? Why shouldn't we be arguing we need a completely brand new building, a brand new culture and brand new constitution that's fit for the 21st century? And that's an argument that could be very popular. And the North-South divide, of course, the people in the North think everything's in London and they're not getting a fair shout anyway on the whole thing. So I think republicanism is about an English Parliament, which Ben included in his bill, by the way. But he also included a Welsh and Scottish Parliament, which we've already got. So republicanism has to focus on grassroots democracy that Jennifer talked about, and an English Parliament, and therefore a written constitution and all those other things that go with it. In other words, not just a single issue campaign, and that's what I slightly agree with, single issue. PR, and I'm in favour of PR, but PR is not the magic bullet for this situation. It really isn't. It's come about because of the collapse of the existing system. We've gone now to a multi-party system when we had a 2-party system, and now the whole thing looks complete and utter nonsense. So obviously somebody's going to try and fix that. But the real problem we've got in this country is the power of the Crown, of the ministers, of the House of Lords, of the House of Commons, of not having a written constitution. These are fundamental questions of power, and they are not central to anybody's manifesto. They're not central to the Workers' Party manifesto. They're not central to Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto, but they have to be because we have a crisis of democracy. So we submit our manifesto to the Workers' Party or anybody else just for comments, because we're raising those issues that aren't being taken up. And I'd be very, very interested to hear if Chris would read it and let us know what he thinks. It's not finished in any shape or form. So I hope that we want to have a dialogue. We've been working at this Republican project for a while, and we do want to have a dialogue because the left does need a new way forward, and the country needs a new way forward. And therefore, we have to do
very much welcome that, Steve. If you could send it to me. One of the things I've been pushing for, I mean, look, the Workers' Party is not perfect, far from it. I'm not saying it is. I just think it happens to be perhaps the best available vehicle at the moment. One of the things I've been pushing for in the Workers' Party, didn't successfully actually move this at the National Members' Council prior to the election, because everybody wanted to focus on the election. But my view was that this actually is key to the election, and that was to create a number of policy forums so we could talk about different issues, because I felt that would be a good way of arming people, our canvassers and so on, with information about key issues. What you're talking about, Steve, is absolutely one of the key issues that we need to be addressing. And so what I would hope, so definitely please do send that to me. What I would like to do is to revisit this idea about, looking at different policy areas. And this would be a really crucially important policy area for the Workers' Party, fundamental policy area for the Workers' Party, which would inform virtually every other aspect of what we are about. And I'm sure if I can get this through, I'm sure that you'd be up for it, if not joining the Workers' Party, at least participating and maybe leading.
Participating definitely, Chris.
Some discussions on that. So I will definitely be. I mean, we've got an NMC, a National Members Council meeting later this month, and I will be revisiting this idea about trying to bring members together to talk about policy and so on, and that would be hopefully an opportunity. And I will, if with your permission, raise this one as maybe being one of the first areas that we should be talking about. The area we are is on the economy as well, because I think the Workers' Party's position on the economy officially could be better actually, but there's still many people obsessed with the whole nonsense of tax and spend, which is a ridiculous and a totally false premise. But anyway, that's an issue for the Workers' Party that we're having this conversation about. Yeah. But certainly on that point, Steve, please do send that, and I would love to, if I can, get you to come along and address one of our meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just say that we're a forum, and that our purpose is precisely to stimulate these kind of discussions that we think are not being done on the left. I'd say the same thing to the Jeremy Corbyn and his allies. It's the same approach that we have to make, and if we can have a common approach, then we can unite the left more effectively. I mean, I'll just end on this little point, Matt. I have to end on this one because for me, for George, I always like to show you these three colours, but George is a bit red, white, and blue, and we're red, green, and violet. And that's we've got a reason for that, of course, because the green is the Levellers, the red and the green is the Chartist movement, and the green and the violet is the suffragettes. So we think England's struggle for democracy has to be central to our history and where we are. And it's not really red, white, and blue that we need, but we would argue it's these colours. We need a new approach to how England is going to be. So there's a whole gambit of things that we have to talk about. But our role as an education forum is to hopefully stimulate the left into having thoughts like this and thinking the unthinkable, because we need a lot of that now. The crisis is so deep that we do need to think some unthinkable things. What you said about House of Commons, we're on the same page there, absolutely. But no, hardly anyone on the left ever talks about that. But I mean, it's such a rotten. But you know better than me do, because you've been worked there. It should be in your workplace. So I won't be telling you about it.
Well, can I just say that the two people who worked and designed the Houses of Parliament all came to a sticky end. Charles Barry died of overwork, and Pugin ended up in Bedlam and ended his life there. Well, so it didn't have a very auspicious start, the Palace of Westminster. Anyway, I think
Pugin spent a long time in Thanet.
Oh, did he?
Where I am. And built several fine buildings before his demise into Bedlamania. So please be careful. We have a parachutey new Labour MP in. So I'd be very careful if you visit Thanet that you come well armed with arguments.
Right.
Good night.
I just want to thank, it's been an absolutely brilliant discussion.
Yeah.
All the contributions from the floor have been really good, and the answers given by Chris and by Steve have been absolutely magnificent. So I want to thank Steve, but particularly Chris, for giving up his time. You must be really tired, Chris. You've just fought an election, and yet you've come and spent all this time with us. So thank you very much indeed.
That's a privilege. Thank you for inviting us, Carol. I appreciate it, actually. Actually, to be honest, I've had a couple of good nights sleep, actually. I don't know if you noticed, I'm in my overalls because I've been doing some work at home, but I'm the Workers' Party representative. So, you know, it's okay to appear with my boiler suit on. But anyway, yeah, I'm not too bad now. I'm more or less recovered. But thanks anyway, Carol, for inviting us. I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed the discussion, actually. It's been great. Thank you.
Good.
Really good discussion.
Thank you very much, Chris. And thanks, Carol. Thanks, Steve.
By-election for you soon.
And everybody else, enjoy the rest of your evening.